The last of the road vanished beneath a white breath of winter, and Lyra kept walking because there was nothing else left to do. Her boots were split at the seams, and her cloak was thin as a rumour. Snow lifted against her shins like small, relentless waves. The mountains offered no sound except the hush of falling flakes, and the occasional moan of wind through pines, a sound that reminded her of wolves singing together on nights when she still belonged to someone. She tried not to think of that. Memory was a trap with teeth. The brand on her forearm, 3 small crescent cuts in the shape of a broken moon, burned even when the air was so cold it numbed her lips. Unworthy, they had said. Unbonded. Dormant. She had swallowed their verdict without a cry, because crying would mean she still believed someone might come after her. No one did. No one ever did. Near dusk, the mountain fortress rose out of the whiteness the way a harbour grows out of fog. First a suggestion, then a wall, then light. Torches along the battlements blurred into halos. The sight shocked her body with a surge of warmth, as if her blood had remembered the concept of fire. She kept walking because stopping would mean admitting how badly she wanted to curl up in the snow and sleep. The outer gate stood open, as if the fortress itself were keeping watch for strays. Lyra hesitated at the threshold, aware of the guards in their fur-lined cloaks, of the iron scent of the portcullis chain, of her own bones rattling inside her skin. "Name?" one of the guards asked, not unkindly. "Lyra," she said, and her voice made a small, brittle sound. She couldn't bring herself to add the family name that no longer wanted her. "I'm only looking for a fire. I can work to earn it." The guards exchanged a glance that said all men and women were softer in the face of winter. One gestured her through with his chin. "Kitchen halls down the lower corridor, round the inner yard. Watch your step on the stones." She bowed her head in thanks and moved like a ghost past the walls. The inner yard was a bowl of silence. Snow blown into smooth drifts, a black well at its center banded with ice. She smelled bread before she saw the kitchen hall. The scent went into her like a promise. The door was propped open with a basket, and heat breathed out in a wave. Lyra stepped inside and bit the inside of her cheek to keep from groaning at the sensation. The room glowed with wine-dark benches and long tables, scarred by knives and laughter. Steam ribboned up from kettles. Someone sang softly near the hearth, a tune with no words. Lyra stood in the shadows like a deer at the edge of a clearing. No one paid her much attention. The kitchen was a world that knew what to do with its hands. Chop, ladle, set, carry. Work had a way of hiding those who wished to remain hidden. She used that magic and drifted toward the far side of the hearth, where a line of firelight knelt along the stones. She crouched there and uncurled her fingers in front of the blaze. They looked like someone else's hands, raw and chapped and clumsy. She did not remember the last time they had been steady. An older woman in a linen cap noticed her, and her eyebrows rose, not unsympathetically. "You look carved out of ice, child. Here," she said, pressing a cup into Lyra's hands. Broth. It was thin, but it tasted like mercy. The woman's eyes, quick and assessing, flicked to the mark on Lyra's forearm where the sleeve had ridden up. She did not comment. "We'll have none sleeping on the stones," she added in a tone that had shepherded many through winters worse than this. She fetched a rolled pallet from beneath a table, and set it near the dying side of the fire. Lyra tried to say thank you, and discovered that the words stuck, swollen with the weight of not having been spoken aloud to anyone in too long. "I'll help," she managed. "I can peel or scrub." "In the morning," the woman said. "Tonight you sleep by the embers and let the heat teach your bones the lesson of living. Name's Meret." "Lyra," she said again, softer now, as if the name would be less fragile in this room. Meret nodded, and moved away as easily as she had come. Those first minutes by the fire, Lyra believed in the possibility that warmth might be enough. She ate a heel of bread and 2 spoonfuls of stew, and felt them find small homes inside her. The sounds of the kitchen faded to a distant lullaby. She lowered herself onto the pallet and tucked her cloak close, and the last thing she saw before sleep took her was the fire, its center, the color of honeyed amber, the edges a blue like mountain twilight. She dreamed of a forest clearing with foxfire on the snow. She dreamed of a heartbeat she could not name. The fortress changed in the deep hours when the corridors emptied, and even the guards spoke in murmurs. The hearth in the great hall burned, banked and patient. Sentries walked a measured path along the walls. Somewhere in the upper keep, a man whose name the whole north spoke only soft when it was dark moved through the silence he had made his home. Cale Arden had learned the art of quiet in the years after the war, when grief became the only language that did not lie to him. He spoke sparingly, because silence told the truth with more precision. He ate enough to live. He slept enough to function. He ruled with a steadiness that made lesser men mistake it for indifference. He had once believed the moon gave a single gift, and that losing it left a wound beyond speech. On winter nights, he walked the keep, because movement eased the pressure in his chest. He paused at the archway to the kitchen hall, drawn there by the scent of embers and bread, two things that remembered the shape of life. He noticed the pallet before he noticed the woman sleeping on it. She had done what strays do, made herself small, arranged her body along the edge, as if afraid to take up space that belonged to someone else. Her hair was the color of wet earth, a plainness that pleased him because it was not a statement, it was a fact. Her hands were clenched beneath her cheek. Even asleep she looked braced against a blow. He should have moved on. That was what he did. He moved on, and left the world to its own endings. But something about the way her shoulder blades pressed through the cloak, something about the mark he glimpsed on her forearm when she shifted, those 3 crescent cuts, poorly healed and still angry, pulled him forward like a tide. He knelt, without letting his armor ring against the stones. It wasn't armor, not tonight. It was a black wool coat, lined with fur, unadorned. Closer, he could hear the raggedness of her breath, the way cold lingered, even in sleep. He had once watched a wolf pup, rescued from a trap, breathe like that, as if each inhale were a negotiation he might lose. "Meret," he murmured, not looking away from the stranger. The kitchen mistress emerged from the pantry, with a basket of onions, and eyes shrewd as always. "She came in with the snow," Meret said. "I was not in the mood to question the storm about its decisions." Cale's mouth shifted in what would be called a smile, by those who insisted on naming things. "You've always had useful moods." Meret's gaze followed his to the woman. "You know that mark," she said, neither accusing nor surprised. "I know the cruelty of men who like to carve law into skin," Cale said, "and you know what they call it when a wolf won't wake to the moon. Dormant. As if sleep were a sin." Meret's hands folded over the basket. "You'll do as you do, Highness, but she needs warmth, not questions." Warmth, and not questions. Cale felt the truth of that like a small knock against the bone. He shifted closer. The woman stirred then, caught between dreams and the ache that lives on the other side of waking. Her lashes fluttered. She turned her face toward the fire and away from him. Her lips parted as if to apologize to the air for the crime of needing it. He did not touch her shoulder because he had learned how touch, even kind, could feel like a demand when you were starving for it. He set his palm near the edge of her cloak and spoke into the space between them, the way one speaks to a skittish animal just before dawn. "You're safe now," he said, the words grounded in a certainty that surprised him. It was not a promise of forever. It was not a claim. It was a simple description of this moment inside these walls, a sentence like bread placed on a table. Her breath caught. Her eyes opened, moss green in the low light, and she flinched before her mind caught up to the gentleness of his voice. She looked at his coat, at the clean line of the fur collar, at the way the fire gilded his cheekbones. She saw power arranged with restraint. She saw a stranger who could end her with a word, and had instead chosen ordinary language. "I'm sorry," she said, blinking herself awake. "I didn't mean to be where I shouldn't." "You mean to be alive," he said. "This is the correct place for it." She swallowed, and the motion seemed to hurt. "I can work." "You can," he agreed. "In the morning. Tonight you can be a person and a body at the same time." Her gaze dropped to his hands, the bare skin of them where the sleeves fell back. They were scarred in a way that did not invite speculation. "Who are you?" she asked, because even gratitude has questions. "Cale," he said. He did not add the rest. She did not ask. Something eased in her shoulders, as if his answer had removed a weight she did not understand she carried. Perhaps it was the absence of a title. Perhaps it was exhaustion rearranging her into someone who could accept mercy without a ledger. She let her eyes close for a heartbeat too long, then forced them open again. "Lyra," she said, because names want to meet in the space between breaths. "I am not a danger to your house. My house has survived worse than an exhausted woman by a fire," he said, and the corner of his mouth tilted again. "Meret will see to you. At first light you'll come to my steward. We'll find tasks that suit your hands without breaking them." A flicker of panic crossed her face, and Cale felt it like a cold against the back of his neck. He had seen that look on men before battle, on children separated from their pack, on himself in the first mirror, after the worst night of his life. "No one will ask you to go where you cannot," he added. "Precise, because precision is a form of kindness. You choose the distance. You decide when the door is too narrow." Her eyes found his again. He saw gratitude sift through fear, not erasing it but laying alongside it like a second blanket. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely air. He inclined his head and stood, letting the silence close gently over the moment. He glanced once at Meret and saw in her expression the satisfaction of someone whose instincts had been confirmed by the universe. He stepped back into the corridor, where the air held the salt of snow and stone, where his breath came and went in even measures. He told himself the warmth he felt beneath his ribs belonged to the fire. He told himself many things the way a man tells himself stories to keep the walls straight. Lyra lay very still, because movement often woke pain. She stared at the hearth until the flames became a kind of language. "You're safe now." The sentence had landed inside her and built a small shelter there. It was not a promise she would demand of the future. It was a coat she could borrow from the present. At some point she slept again. This time her dreams were not full of teeth. Morning found the kitchen hall already half noisy with the sturdy business of the day. Meret shoved a bowl of porridge into Lyra's hands, and pretended not to notice that Lyra held it as if it might be taken away. "Eat," Meret said. "Then bring me that stack of plates, and we'll see how well you scrub without breaking the glaze." Lyra ate and felt the food anchor her to a world where the next minute could be lived, and then the next. She washed plates in a tub of water that stung her cracked fingers into life. She stood beside a girl named Hanny, who taught her the rhythm of the job, without turning instruction into shame. A boy darted past with too many knives in his arms. Someone scolded him. Someone else laughed. Nothing in anyone's eyes discovered her secret. That was the thing about a dormant wolf. People expected you to be loud with your lack. Lyra had learned silence so thoroughly it lived in her bones. She moved through tasks until the room steadied around her, until she could listen without bracing for words shaped like blows. Mid-morning, a messenger in a slate-grey tunic appeared at the threshold. He spoke her name, and the sound made her spine stiffen with an old habit. "The steward will see you," he said. "He'd have seen you at dawn if he had his way, but the king walks late in winter, and that makes the rest of us human." Lyra wiped her hands and followed the messenger through corridors that smelled of beeswax and wool. She saw the great hall only in a glance, and already knew its geometry. Banners sleeping from the beams, narrow windows that turned snow into sheets of light, a fire that was more law than blaze. They paused outside a door with iron hinges shaped like wings. The steward was a man with ink on his fingers, and the kind of mind that enjoyed lining up columns and watching them stand straight. He watched Lyra the same way and seemed satisfied that she did not wobble. "You've a cook's hands and a quiet step," he said. "Both useful. We'll put you in the herb room and the storeroom for now. Small inventory, careful work, no heavy lifting until you've eaten enough to restore those wrists from twigs to branches." His gaze slid to the mark on her arm, and away again with politeness that some would call grace, and others would call avoidance. He wrote her name in a ledger, and spoke to her as if she were likely to remain. It was a small courtesy, and it broke something fragile in her in the cleanest possible way. The day became a sequence of manageable tasks. Lyra carried sprigs of rosemary that made her fingertips smell like a green well, counted jars of dried mushrooms, learned the pace of the keep's requests as the sun moved across narrow panes. People spoke to her, and did not look for a mirror of themselves in her answers. She was an instrument that made usable music. She was a pair of hands. In odd, unguarded moments, the words from the night before returned, and warmed her like a coal in a pocket. "You're safe now." She did not know that he had meant them without condition. She did not know that he had not meant them at all, and the truth simply used his mouth to cross the space between them. At dusk, snow began again. The keep felt closer, like a breath you could see. Lyra finished her last inventory of the day and realized she had not thought about the moon once, not in its old way, counting the nights until it would rise, counting the ways she would fail to meet it. She carried a basket back through the corridor, and nearly collided with a woman in a midnight blue gown, who moved like someone born to both music and war. The woman caught Lyra's elbow to steady her, then let go at once, as if prepared to apologize if touch had been unwelcome. "My fault," the woman said. "I came around the corner like a storm." Her eyes were the exact color of twilight on ice, and held a humor that did not depend on laughter to be felt. "I am Elsin," she added, lightly, in the tone of someone who believes introductions are bridges. "I manage things. On bad days that includes the king." Lyra blinked, then remembered to answer human words with human words. "Lyra," she said, "I count jars." "A good and necessary magic," Elsin said. "Without it, men believe emptiness will feed them." She tilted her head, taking in Lyra's thinness, the cautious way she held herself. "If anyone behaves as if you are a problem, tell me. I enjoy solving problems." There was nothing threatening in the offer. It was the kind of confidence that could be leaned on, because it understood the weight it asked to carry. Lyra nodded once, and Elsin smiled as if that agreement had been her goal all along. "You'll do," Elsin said approvingly, and moved on with her blue skirts like a low tide. Night returned with a wind behind it, pressing its cold mouth to the stones. In the kitchen, Meret stationed Lyra near the hearth again, under the pretense of sorting dried thyme, and Lyra sat there, as the evening meal sent streams of voices through the hall. She let the noise wash over her, and did not dive beneath it. When the rush ended, and the room settled to the quiet pulse of simmering pots, she laid the last of the thyme into a jar, and watched the fire ease from orange to coals. She could have fought to stay awake, the way she had trained herself to do in ditches and lean-tos, and the spaces beneath trees. Instead, she listened to her body, and it told her a truth older than law: rest or break. She folded herself onto the pallet, and closed her eyes, and did not dream at first because the present was sufficient. Footsteps at the threshold returned her to the soft side of waking. She did not startle. The air around his presence carried the same steadiness as the night before. She opened her eyes and found him standing there, not looming, not inspecting, simply existing in a way that made the room feel correctly measured. His coat was unfastened, and snow had melted into wet commas along the hem. He did not come closer until her gaze met his. This time she did not flinch. "How do you find the keep tonight?" "Lyra who counts jars?" he asked, and the faintest smile ghosted across his mouth, as if the title pleased him. "Full of tasks that fit inside hands," she said, "and people who don't ask why I need the work." "There are enough questions in the world that have no answers," he said. "We need not manufacture more." She watched him and tried to match the man to the stories she had heard without realizing she had heard them. About the northern king who spoke less than he listened, who rode at the front when riding was necessary, who built walls that sheltered rather than announced themselves as monuments. Her mind touched the fact of him and retreated like a hand from a warm cup, not because it burned but because it startled. "You said I was safe," she ventured, tasting the boldness of voicing what mattered. "I did," he said. "Was it true?" she asked. And there was no challenge in the question, only the careful gravity of someone who has paid dearly for believing words that sounded like comfort, and were actually weights. He inclined his head, and light from the embers walked along the line of his jaw. "As far as I can command such a thing," he said. "Within these walls under my watch, from those who answer to me, yes." He paused and let the next sentence form without decoration. "If danger comes and exceeds my command, I will meet it before it reaches you." The words reverberated low, not a vow designed for ceremony, but an instinct spoken aloud. Lyra's throat tightened in the achingly simple way that means tears are considering their options. She nodded because she could not speak, and then, to her astonishment, found herself offering him something back. "I won't be trouble," she said, and it sounded like a defense, so she tried again. "I mean, I will try not to be more trouble than any person is simply by existing." He looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "You may be exactly as much trouble as you are," he said. "People who promise absence promise nothing I value." He glanced at the fire, at the banked heat, then at her hands. "May I?" he asked, and when she nodded he crouched and held his palms out toward the embers, as if they were a small animal that required patience. When I was younger, I thought fire was a conquest, he said. You fed it, it obeyed. Now I understand it's a conversation. You give it what it can use, and it returns what you need in its own shape. She did not know why the words steadied her, except that they made the world sound like a place where exchange could be honest. My wolf doesn't wake, she said suddenly, softly, as if the confession had slipped free of her without permission. He did not turn his head sharply the way some would, did not let interest feel like a trap. He let the sentence rest. There are many reasons a wolf sleeps, he said after a moment. Some are injury. Some are wisdom. The last word made her breath stutter. Wisdom? A body that has survived too much has sometimes learned the truth before the mind does, he said. That it is not safe to come when called. That it is not safe to bare the throat to a moon that does not love you. Wisdom can look like refusal. She stared at the embers until they were a field of tiny suns. No one had ever called her absence anything but lack. The word he had chosen built a small step inside her. She had not known she needed. What if it never wakes? She asked. And it was not despair but curiosity, the kind that maps the edges of a life so one can live within it with dignity. Then you will be the woman who lives a human life with a human body, he said. And you will possess all the wildness a human heart can contain. He stood then, not to leave, but to give the conversation a shape that would not trap either of them inside it. Rest, he said. Merit will continue her reign of benevolent terror. Elsin will pretend to be softer than she is and fail at it. The steward will count and measure and carve sense out of the day. If you need me, speak my name to a guard and it will find me. She almost asked why. She almost asked what debt men like him expected in exchange for mercy. But the air around him held no ledger. She believed what he had offered because it did not ask her to be less. Good night, she said. Good night, he returned, and then, because leaving without an echo would have felt wrong, he added, You're safe now. The words threaded themselves through the weave of heat and stone. She slept, and for the first time in too long, sleep was not a cliff but a shore. In the upper keep, Cale shrugged out of his coat and stood for a time without moving. He could feel the place where grief had once built a nest along his ribs, the brittle twigs of old vows. He had not meant to speak those words to a stranger. He had not meant to feel relief when she said her name to him, like a gift she did not yet know she had offered. He told himself he was simply doing what kings do, shelter, assign, ensure. Then he closed his eyes, and somewhere in the deep quiet of his chest, a heartbeat altered its rhythm half a shade toward something he had promised himself he would not hear again. Snow fell, and the keep breathed, and in the kitchen hall a woman slept inches from a fire she no longer feared would burn out before morning. The winter held the mountains in a white silence that hummed beneath every breath. Days slipped into one another like cards shuffled by an unseen hand. Lyra learned the rhythm of the fortress. The clang of the morning bell, the hiss of snow melting on the courtyard stones, the pulse of voices from the kitchens, the soft thunder of boots in the great hall. It was a world built of tasks that belonged to no one, and yet mattered to everyone. She found comfort in that, a life without titles, where being unnoticed meant survival, not shame. But some things in her refused to stay quiet. When she carried jars from the herbroom, the scent of sage and wintergreen tugged her memory toward the wood she had fled. When she heard wolves crying beyond the outer gate, the old ache stirred, a reminder of what she was supposed to be. Each night she lay by the fire, and told herself not to listen for the moon. Cale noticed her before he meant to. It began with small things. The careful way she moved through a crowd without bending her head too low, the manner she handled fragile bottles with reverence rather than fear, the habit of pausing just long enough to steady another's balance when they stumbled. He told himself he was studying the efficiency of his household. The truth was quieter, and more dangerous. He was beginning to anticipate her presence the way a man anticipates warmth when crossing a frozen room. On the 5th morning after her arrival, he found himself standing by the practice yard, watching her carry a basket of herbs across the inner bridge. The snowlight caught in her hair and turned it the color of morning bark. Nothing remarkable, yet he found he could not look away. The guard captain approached, bowing low. "Sire, the Western Patrol returns at dusk. Will you review the reports?" Cale kept his eyes on the courtyard. "At dusk," he said. "Send them to Elsin first." He did not add that Elsin would likely interpret the deflection as what it was: avoidance. He had learned that command meant being transparent to those who knew how to see. Later, when the sun was a pale coin above the peaks, he entered the kitchens again. The air was thick with the smell of baking and roasted root vegetables. Lyra stood at a long table, slicing pears into even crescents. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, the skin still marked by faint scars, but no longer raw. Her hair was tied back with a strip of linen, and a smear of flour dusted one cheek. She sensed him before she saw him. Her hand froze, knife poised mid-air. She turned, and for an instant, fear crossed her face. Not terror, just the old reflex of someone who had learned that powerful men appear for reasons that are rarely kind. "Majesty," she said softly, realizing now who he was. He inclined his head. "Cale will suffice here. The title has no appetite at a hearth." Merritt caught the exchange from across the room, and raised one eyebrow in satisfaction before pretending to be too busy with a pot to care. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said, stepping closer. "I've come to ask for tea. Or perhaps an excuse for conversation that doesn't sound like command." Lyra blinked, uncertain if she was expected to laugh. "Tea? I can manage," she murmured, setting the knife aside. She chose a small clay pot, and filled it from the kettle, dropping leaves into the water, with the careful precision of ritual. While the brew darkened, Cale leaned against the hearth, the fire reflected in his eyes, turning them a deep bronze. "You've been working every day since you arrived." "It's what keeps me steady," she said. "Stillness makes the mind louder." He nodded, understanding. "And the mind isn't always a kind companion." Lyra poured the tea into 2 cups and hesitated before offering one to him. Their fingers brushed. It was nothing, a fleeting contact, an accident, but it startled her enough that the cup trembled slightly. Cale saw it and steadied the rim with his own hand, not touching her again. "Easy," he said quietly. "The world doesn't ask for perfection, only presence." Her throat tightened. "Presence got me exiled." "From fools," he said, taking the cup. Their fear made them blind. They saw silence and thought emptiness. Lyra looked at him for a long moment, then down at her hands. "You talk like a man who's been left alone too long with his own ghosts." His laugh was low, the kind that held no mockery. That would be accurate. They drank the tea in the quiet between the fire's sighs. For the first time in many years, Cassel found words coming without effort. He told her about the way storms move across the northern sea, how the sound of ice breaking is both destruction and birth. She listened the way a dry field listens to rain. When he finished, she told him that she used to collect small stones from the riverbeds near her pack's border, each one shaped by time instead of design. "They reminded me that the moon doesn't make every miracle," she said. He smiled slightly. "Then you already understand my kingdom." The conversation might have ended there, suspended in the comfort of simple truth, but a sudden gust outside slammed one of the shutters open. The wind burst through the room, scattering embers across the stone floor. Merritt cursed, and grabbed a damp cloth to smother them. Lyra reacted faster. Too fast. She reached for a burning coal with her bare hand, pressing it against the edge of her sleeve to stop it from catching. Cale caught her wrist before she could burn herself, closing his fingers around hers. Heat met heat. His skin calloused, hers trembling. The coal hissed out on the stones. She stared at their joined hands, at the faint shimmer where skin met skin, and a flash of light rippled up her arm like the ghost of a heartbeat. Cale felt it too. For a moment his vision blurred. The world tilted. He heard something inside himself that sounded like a wolf's breath, drawn in after a long sleep. She pulled back first, breath unsteady. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for saving the table. For what just happened." He studied her eyes, searching for deceit and finding only fear. "Tell me," he said softly. "My wolf," she began, voice trembling. There's something wrong with it. It hasn't answered me since the ritual. When you touched me, it stirred." Cale's pulse slowed, then quickened again like a drum half remembered. "That's not wrong," he said carefully. "It means it remembers." "No," she said, shaking her head. "It shouldn't respond to anyone. Not like that. Not to a king who's already—" She stopped, realizing what she was about to reveal. "Already bound once," she finished, eyes down. "I know who you are now. The widowed Alpha King who swore never to take another mate." He took a slow breath. "Oaths are made in grief. Sometimes grief isn't a god worth worshipping." She swallowed hard. "If the moon marks me again, it'll mark me through you. I don't want that." He stepped closer, close enough for her to see the small scar beneath his jaw, a relic of battles he never spoke of. "The moon does as it will," he said. "But I have no intention of claiming what doesn't wish to be claimed." The statement should have comforted her. Instead, it unraveled something deep inside. Tears rose before she could stop them. "Why are you being kind?" she whispered. "You gain nothing." Cale's answer came like a truth that had been waiting years to be spoken. "Because I remember what it's like to be cold, and wish someone would whisper you're safe now, and have no one." The words struck her chest like warmth piercing through ice. She turned away, unable to hold his gaze, and pressed her hand against her heart as if to steady it. "Then maybe we both remember too much," she said. "Perhaps," he murmured. Outside, the wind quieted, leaving only the sound of the fire reclaiming its breath. That night, Lyra didn't sleep by the kitchen hearth. Mirette found her a small chamber above the storehouse, a narrow bed, a window that faced the pines. It wasn't comfort exactly, but it was hers. She lay awake long after midnight, thinking about the pulse that had passed between them. Her wolf had stirred, faint but real, and she didn't know whether to feel hope or dread. Cale sat alone in his study, the parchment before him unread. The memory of her touch haunted his skin. He had buried his bond years ago beneath stone and vow, but now it whispered like a spark beneath ash. He closed his eyes and saw her. Thin, resolute, eyes filled with the kind of strength that survives ruin. Elsin entered without knocking, as she always did. "You're thinking about the girl," she said. He didn't deny it. "She's different." "She's trouble," Elsin said, dropping a folder on his desk. "And that's not always a bad thing. The mark on her arm, those cuts mean exile. But they also mean she was meant for leadership once. The pacts don't mark nobodies that way." Cale's fingers tightened on the parchment. "They broke her for failure." "Then you and she have something in common," Elsin replied gently. "The only question is whether you'll let that make you allies or ghosts." He said nothing, but when she left, he found himself looking out toward the dark courtyard. Snowflakes drifted past the window, each one a quiet confession of falling and surviving it. Below, in her narrow room, Lyra pressed her hand against her chest and whispered to the silence, "You're safe now." The words didn't sound like his anymore. They sounded like hers. Learned, borrowed, almost believed. Morning would bring new questions: what woke inside her, and what it meant for the man who had once sworn never to love again. For now the mountain fortress slept, and two hearts, one king's, one exile's, beat in unfamiliar harmony, waiting for the moment the world would demand to know what it meant. The storm arrived 3 days later. It came from the north with a voice that tore through the pines and made the keep groan, as if the stones themselves remembered fear. The horizon disappeared into a whirl of snow and dusk. Cale stood on the battlements as the wind clawed at his cloak. Messengers had brought word from the lower passes. An avalanche had cut off the southern road. The outer watchtower was trapped. Inside it, 4 of his men waited for rescue. And if the blizzard didn't kill them, hunger would. Elsin found him there, her face sharp with cold and concern. "You can't go," she said. "Not with the moon this close. Not with that look in your eyes." Cale didn't turn. "If I don't go, they'll die. So will you. Then I'll die doing what keeps this kingdom whole." Elsin knew that arguing with him was as useless as fighting weather. She stepped aside, muttering something about ghosts who refused to rest. When he was gone, she whispered to the air, "Then maybe she's the only one who can bring him back." Below, Lyra heard the call for preparations echo through the keep. She felt it in her chest. A ripple of unease that didn't belong to her alone. The closer the moon crept, the louder her body became, as if something beneath her skin had begun pacing in a locked room. She tried to steady her breathing, but when Merritt told her the king had gone into the blizzard, her pulse broke into chaos. Gone where? To the watchtower, Merritt said, wiping her hands on her apron. The path's half ice, half death. He won't wait for it to ease. Lyra's blood went cold. He can't survive that alone. Merritt's eyes softened, old and knowing. Some hearts don't measure survival the same way as others. Go if you must, girl, but know that every step into that snow asks you what you love enough to lose. Lyra didn't answer. She wrapped her cloak tight and stepped into the storm. The world outside was a blur of white noise and frozen breath. The wind struck her like claws, but something inside her had already awakened. Her wolf wasn't silent anymore. It whispered beneath her ribs, faint and steady, a pulse of instinct older than fear. She followed the path up toward the cliffs, guided not by sight but by scent, by the strange certainty that she could feel Cale's heartbeat through the storm. Hours passed, or minutes. Time in a blizzard loses its shape. When she found him, he was half buried in snow, trying to free the last of his men from a shattered sled. His coat was torn, blood on the sleeve dark against the frost. "Cale!" she shouted over the wind. He looked up, startled, disbelief flickering through exhaustion. "Lyra, what in the gods' names?" She stumbled to him, hands shaking. "You said we were safe. That means both of us." He wanted to protest, to send her back, but the words froze behind his teeth. She was kneeling beside him before he could speak, helping lift the wounded man onto the sled. The two remaining guards took the reins, driving the horses forward toward the lower trail. Cale tried to follow, stumbled, and she caught his arm. "You're freezing," she said. "You can't. Don't tell me what I can't," he muttered, though his voice had lost its usual authority. They found shelter beneath a stone overhang, a hollow half buried by snow. She built a small fire with trembling hands. He sank against the wall, chest rising in ragged rhythm. The moment his eyes began to close, she caught his face between her palms. "Don't you dare," she said, voice breaking. He managed a weak smile. "You give orders now?" "Only when they matter." The fire grew, small but bright. She pressed her body against his to share warmth. He tried to move away at first, old instincts whispering about propriety, but she didn't let him. "You're safe now," she whispered, echoing his words from that first night. Something inside him cracked open. He let out a slow breath that sounded like surrender. "You shouldn't have come," he said. "I couldn't stay," she answered. "Not when I felt you calling." He looked at her then, not as a king, not as a savior, but as a man finally seeing someone who mirrored his silence. Their eyes locked, and in that instant, the world seemed to pause. The storm still screamed beyond the rocks, but between them there was only the rhythm of two hearts learning the same song. The warmth between them deepened, not into hunger, but into recognition. The air shimmered faintly, the way moonlight sometimes does when it decides to notice you. Cale felt it first, a stirring deep within his chest, a thread pulling taut between them. Lyra's breath hitched. Her wolf had woken. Not in dominance, not in rage, but in quiet alignment, its heartbeat finding his. He reached up, brushing snowflakes from her hair. "It seems the moon has its own opinions," he murmured. She let out a shaky laugh. "Does it frighten you?" "Yes," he said honestly, "because it feels like hope, and hope can kill a man who's forgotten how to carry it." Lyra leaned her forehead against his. "Then, we'll learn to carry it together." Outside, the wind shifted, a long sigh through the pines, as if even the storm had grown tired. The snow eased. Dawn broke slow and silver, light catching on frost like the breath of a sleeping god. When they emerged, the path back to the keep glowed with morning. By the time they returned, the fortress was alive with relief. The rescued men were tended to. Elsin's sharp voice echoed orders that sounded suspiciously like prayers. When she saw Cale and Lyra walking side by side, she hid her smile behind a glare. "Next time," she said dryly, "send a message before you decide to wrestle a blizzard." Cale's lips quirked. "I'll keep that in mind." Lyra caught Merritt's gaze across the courtyard. The older woman nodded once, eyes glistening. That night, When quiet finally reclaimed the halls, Lyra stood by the same hearth where her story in this place had begun. The firelight trembled on her face. Cale stood beside her. No armor, no title, just a man whose silence no longer felt like solitude. He reached for her hand, slow enough that she could pull away if she wished. She didn't. "When you first came here," he said, "you looked like someone waiting for the world to end." "And now?" she asked. He smiled, faint and real. "Now you look like someone who knows it didn't." Lyra's voice softened. "Then, perhaps we both survived more than we thought." They stood there as the fire dimmed, neither needing more than the sound of shared breathing. The moon rose over the mountains, pale and kind for once. Somewhere far below, wolves howled, not in mourning, but in greeting. Cale turned to her, his words quiet enough to belong only to her. "You're safe now." Lyra leaned into him, her voice steady. "We both are." The flames flickered, painting them in gold. For the first time, safety didn't mean silence, it meant belonging. And as the camera of imagination would pull back, through the snowlight and the pines, the storyteller's voice would return, not as Cale, not as Lyra, but as something between them. "Tell me, when someone says you're safe now, what does it mean to you? Is it a promise, a lie we choose to believe? Or the moment we finally let ourselves rest beside the fire, no longer waiting for the world to end? I'd love to know what you think."